handcuffing me in front of my family." This was the first thing the Godfather said as the car door was closed behind him. "I know the drill. You're supposed to handcuff me. It was kind of you not to." The agents found it difficult to respond to his gratitude, and the little two-car convoy set off in silence, the sentinels in the lead car, Andy Kurins driving the other, with Castellano and O'Brien sitting in the back. At Richmond Road, the cars turned left toward the Verrazano Bridge, and Kurins put an all-news station on the radio. "This just in," the newscaster said. "At this moment, agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the New York State Organized Crime Task Force are arresting the reputed leaders of all of New York's 5 mafia families. According to U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani, the arrests are part of the most far-reaching mob investigation ever, an investigation aimed at convicting the entire mob leadership, the so-called Commission, under federal racketeering statutes. Tonight's arrests cap a 4-year law enforcement effort, which, according to one highly placed source, included the 1983 bugging of the Staten Island home of Paul Castellano, alleged boss of the Gambino family and de facto head of the Commission." Andy Kurins watched the road. Joe O'Brien looked straight ahead. The Godfather leaned forward so as not to miss a word. Then he gave a little groan. "Is that true? Did you guys bug my house?" No doubt he was using "you guys" generically. He could not have known that O'Brien and Kurins were the very ones who had planted the microphone. "Yes, sir," said O'Brien. "I'm afraid it is." "Jesus Cristo. When? How'd you do it?" "I'm sorry, we can't tell you that." "No, I suppose you can't." His chin collapsed onto his chest, and he became totally subdued. After a few minutes, he said softly, I don't feel too good. Do you think we could stop for some candy bars?" Andy Kurins sought out Joe O'Brien's eyes in the rearview mirror. Stopping would be highly irregular and would pose a security risk, but the man was ill and could go into a diabetic coma. O'Brien nodded yes, and Kurins notified the other car on the two-way. "Are Hershey bars okay?" Kurins asked in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven. Snickers, if they have them." Castellano wolfed down 2 candy bars. They brought him around incredibly fast. They continued on toward the bridge. "Bugging a man's house. I'm sorry, fellas. I know you got your job to do, but I don't think that's right. Place of business, okay. Social club, okay, all right. But a man's home, it's personal. No one needs to know what a man says or does when he's home. I'm sure you know all sorts of things about me that no one really has a right to know." "There's this thing called minimization," said O'Brien. "We try not to listen to personal stuff." The Godfather gave his big head an unpersuaded shake. "No, you're trying to spare my feelings. But I know, you know all about my marriage, you know all about Glory and me. You know all about me, about my health, and you even know about my dick." The agents were too abashed to speak, but Castellano went on, a note of goading defiance in his voice. "Come on, boys, don't be squeamish. The body's just the body." They traveled along in silence. Then the boss said, "I knew there was something there. That's what gets me. I had the house swept twice. You probably know that. You probably know a lot of things. How bad does it look for me?" "Very bad, sir." Instantly, Castellano seemed depressed. He leaned back against the vinyl upholstery and rubbed his eyes. He ate some Tums and stared sullenly out the window. The courtyard of 26 Federal Plaza could be seen from a long way off. It was lit with the biting blue-white of television lights and peppered with the little shocks of strobes. All the networks were there, as well as newspapermen and radio reporters. From the number of government vehicles parked at curbside, it seemed clear that most, if not all, of the other mobsters had already been brought in. The grand entrance of Paul Castellano, the Godfather whose house had been bugged, would be the climax of the media carnival. Andy Kurins looked over his shoulder at Joe O'Brien. "These people are vultures. I say let's duck them." "Do it." Kurins floored the Plymouth and screeched past the newshounds. They drove around to the dark side of the building, where a guarded ramp led down to the employees-only garage. There they ushered the Godfather into a back elevator and brought him to the 28th floor for processing. "So now I owe you 2, said the Godfather. "You owe us nothing," said O'Brien. "But give me your wrists. I gotta cuff you before we go into the office." Paul spent the night at the Manhattan Correctional Center. The next day was filled with paperwork and technicalities, of shuttling back and forth between FBI headquarters and the courthouse, leading up to a bail hearing at 3 p.m. In between the bureaucratic steps, there would be pockets of dead time, and Kurins and O'Brien offered the Godfather a choice. He could stay in the cramped and bustling marshal's lockup, or he could hang around with them. How often do I get to schmooze with the FBI? You got a quiet place we can smoke some cigars? With their docile prisoner properly shackled, the agents found a small, empty office. Once safely behind the frosted glass door, they removed the Godfather's handcuffs, and he produced 3 huge Coronas from an inside pocket of his jacket. The 3 men puffed on their cigars, and then the Godfather said, "Hey, I know you disapprove. That's why we're here after all, isn't it? So the United States government can make the point that we do not approve of how certain guineas make their living. Okay, fair enough. If I was the United States government, I wouldn't approve either. If I was the government, I'd put my ass in jail for 1,000 years. But not because I'm wrong. You see, that's the part I object to. This idea that the law is right, and that's the end of the story. Come on, we're not children here. The law is, how should I put it, a convenience. Or a convenience for some people and an inconvenience for some other people. Like take the law that says you can't go into someone else's house. That's convenient for people who have houses. I have a house, so hey, I like that law. But the guy without a house, what's he think of it? Stay out in the rain, schnook. That's what that law means to him. Besides, the law can always change its mind. Like, the law can say you can't go into someone's house unless it's Paul Castellano and you want to put a bug in it. Andy Kurins flicked a glowing ash into a green metal trash can. But you can't just have people obeying the laws that suit them. Obviously, answered the Godfather. But that's exactly what I'm saying. It's a practical question, nothing more. The government wants to put me away as a practical matter. Hey, they can. They got the power. Me, I try not to kid myself. Some people think I'm a big man. Bullshit. What can I do? A few people, maybe I can get them jobs. But they have some trouble, I can help their families. But look at this. His expansive gesture took in the massive courthouse building, the huge marble steps, and the vast paved plaza beyond. Now this is power. What's my little bit of influence compared to this? The government decides I'm too much trouble, they can crush me like a cockroach. I understand that. No hard feelings. Is anybody else getting hungry? Kurins and O'Brien realized quite suddenly that they were, and Kurins offered to fetch some lunch from the employees' cafeteria. Cafeteria? That's like being in jail before you go to jail. I could really go for a good corned beef sandwich. From 2nd Avenue Deli? Asked O'Brien. Yeah. Do you know, that's my favorite. Mr. Castellano. Paul. Enough of the mister. Paul, we've been studying you for 5 years. You think we don't know whose corned beef you like? It's the best, said the former butcher. Lean, but not too lean. Iridescent like fish scales. Served on a crusty rye bread with lots of caraway. Kurins and O'Brien caught each other's eyes. Nah, said Andy Kurins' expression. No way, said Joe O'Brien's gaze. It's only 5 of 12. The bail hearing isn't until 3. Of course, if you don't have the balls. Taking the Godfather to a delicatessen. This was a truly absurd idea. The man was a federal prisoner, the central target of a vastly complex and vastly expensive law enforcement dragnet. It had taken the government half a decade to get him into the courthouse building. Now 2 FBI agents were going to blithely let him out again to get a sandwich? No, too much could go wrong. We'll take the cuffs off when we get to the car, said O'Brien. Good. I'd have a tough time eating otherwise. Inside the noisy restaurant, the harried-looking maitre d' started to give them a perfunctory hello, then did a double-take. His face bore the terrified expression of someone either looking at a ghost or expecting to be taken hostage. Mr. Castellano, I thought you were, I was, the Godfather cut in. These are friends of mine, Max. Mr. Kurins, Mr. O'Brien. Put us way in the back. And, Max, forget that we were here. Over the mountainous corned beef sandwich, Paul Castellano talked incessantly of his paramour, Gloria. Listen, there's something I want you guys to know. I don't give a damn, but I do. I want you guys to know I was never a womanizer. The occasional encounter, okay, it happens, but I was never one to keep a mistress. I'll laugh if you want, but I love my wife and my kids. And it seemed to me, you cheat. You're just not cheating on the woman, you're cheating on the whole family. That didn't seem right to me. Alright, so now you say I'm an old fart, an old hypocrite. My body's all messed up. I got this young girlfriend. I've been a bastard to my poor wife. But it isn't quite that simple. I'm old, yeah, I'm sick. But desire remains. Maybe it'd be better if it didn't, but it does. And what the hell's a man supposed to do when a desire remains and he simply cannot bring himself to touch his wife ever again? Now you guys, you are young. I'm sure your wives are pretty, and I hope to God you enjoy each other. And I hope that what happened to me never happens to you. Happened to me in the morning. That's when it always happens, I think. Never at night. But when you first crack an eye, you want to look at the new day and see some hope. You wake up, you look over at your wife, who's still asleep, and you see an old lady. Gray hair, papery skin, loose flesh. You're still fond of her, in a way, maybe even you still love her. And you know she's no older, no more beat up than you are, but you also know that at that moment you will never touch her again. You can't. Touching her would be like making love with death. The Godfather wiped his lips on a paper napkin and pushed his plate away from him. Fastidiously, he smoothed his tie. Then, with a harshness that surprised the agents, he called for the waitress to clear away his half-eaten lunch. "What, didn't you like it today?" she asked him. At 5 minutes before 3, Paul Castellano, flanked by Special Agents Andris, Kurins, and Joseph F. O'Brien, entered a third-floor hearing room in the federal courthouse in Manhattan. The Honorable Michael Dollinger would be on the bench, and the church-like courtroom pews were filled with notables from the world of organized crime, their attorneys, and their families. Tommy Bellotti was there. The loyal Nina Castellano attended, with her daughter Connie and her 3 sons, Joe, Phil, and Paul Jr. The Godfather greeted them warmly, but with restraint, as he walked slowly down the center aisle toward the long and crowded double rank of defendants' tables. At the swinging gate that separated the spectators' area from that of the principals, Kurins and O'Brien passed the Godfather along to the marshals. They felt strangely like they were giving the bride away at a wedding. Castellano took his place next to his attorney, James LaRosa. The hearing lasted 2.5 hours and was deathly dull, a droning litany of technicalities, formulas, useless protests, and repeated results. But somehow the proceedings' very dullness served to persuade the mafia bosses of just how much trouble they were in. By the end of the hearing, the members of the Cosa Nostra's governing board looked wrung out and depressed. The amounts set for bail were almost irrelevant, though they were the sort of figures that looked good in the papers. For the underbosses, $1 million was the price of freedom. The family leaders had to shell out up to $2 million each. Big Paul got the max. He had now plunked $4 million into the kitty that guaranteed his appearances in court. It was a figure calculated to reinforce the man's sense of honor about facing the music. After the hearing, O'Brien told Tommy Bellotti to move his car to a dead-end alley called Cardinal Hayes Place. O'Brien and Kurins would try to slip the Godfather past the horde of reporters and meet Tommy there. O'Brien, Kurins, and Castellano took an elevator to the basement level. They clambered through a storage room in a reeking passageway lined with small dumpsters. Then there was a tunnel, badly lit, its moist walls furry with mold. This led to a half-flight of concrete steps, and the Godfather didn't so much climb them as pull himself up the banister. Finally, there was a door that said emergency exit only. Joe O'Brien pushed it open, and an impossibly loud fire bell began to clang. 10 yards away, Tommy Bellotti was standing alongside the idling black Cadillac limousine, holding the door for his master. 50 yards from the car, a horde of journalists was rounding the corner into the alley. "You'll make it if you run," O'Brien hollered over the infernal clanging. "Sorry," the Godfather yelled back. "I don't do that." Like a consummate actor, he took just a moment to put himself in character. He straightened his tie. He pushed back his hair. He wiped his sweaty face on his handkerchief and put on an expression of imperial calm. Then, as if he had all the time in the world, he extended a huge, meaty hand toward the two agents. "I want you to know that I appreciate the way you've treated me." Kurins and O'Brien could find no words to reply, and the Godfather broke into one of his rare, crooked smiles. "So, how many do I owe you now?" At last, with a regal gait and not the slightest sign of hurry, he strolled to the car. Tony Bellotti closed the door behind him just as the forwardmost reporters were coming within camera range. He used the mere threat of his elbows to clear himself a path to the driver's door. Paul Castellano looked through the side window at the agents. He nodded at them and offered a gesture that was midway between a wave and a salute. Then, in an instant of slapstick, Tony Bellotti floored the caddy, and the Godfather's face, contorted like that of an astronaut, disappeared as he was thrown backwards against the seat. And that was the last time that Joe O'Brien and Andy Kurins saw the Godfather alive. It may be that Delacroce's death rattle and the pronouncement of Big Paul's fate were one. It is also true, however, that Castellano responded to Delacroce's passing with a pair of misjudgments so egregious, so inexplicable, as to raise the possibility that they were in some way suicidal. The Godfather did not attend Delacroce's wake, and in a milieu that places such a huge importance on ceremony, ritual, and tokens of respect, this was a tremendous and seemingly gratuitous insult. Why didn't he go? No one knows. He had troubles of his own, of course. His trial was in progress, his own health was problematical, but still, not to take an hour to visit the corpse of the man who had been his underboss for 9 years. Big Paul's second monstrous error was more strictly professional in nature. He unilaterally decided that the new underboss of the Gambino family would be Tommy Bellotti. Tommy Bellotti? No, this was unthinkable. First of all, it showed reckless disregard of the precedent that had shared family leadership between the two factions. It certainly blew any chance of using Delacroce's death as an opportunity to reconcile the factions. But beyond that, there was Tommy himself. Spluttering, violent, tongue-tied Tommy. Even in an organization as ragtag and beaten down as the New York Mafia had become, this was not leadership material, and everybody knew it. It is probably the case that in promoting his true blue driver, Big Paul also signed Bellotti's death warrant. On December 16, 1985, a man named G. Robert Blakey, the Cornell professor who had largely conceived and drafted the RICO statute, came to New York University to present a seminar regarding the effective application of the vastly complicated law. At a pre-seminar cocktail reception in Blakey's honor, FBI men, city detectives, and prosecutors sipped drinks from plastic cups, smoked cigars, and swapped stories. Then just before 6 p.m., beepers started going off all over the room, dozens and dozens of them. People ran to the phones, of which there were exactly 2, and the news fanned out through the crowd like an outbreak of a new virus. Details got garbled along the way. About the central fact, however, there was no confusion. Big Paul Castellano, along with his driver and perhaps the only friend he had left, had just been whacked, gangland style. Neat. Joe O'Brien found he had to sit down in one of the aluminum folding chairs at the periphery of the reception room. He had a murky feeling in his stomach. He felt electricity around his knees. He'd spent half a decade of his life trying to bring Paul Castellano to justice. Now they'd never get to the bottom. The shooters had seen to that. When Paul and Tony went down, they took 5 years' work along with them. Andy Kurins sat down next to him. He took a puff of his cigar and a pull of his beer. "Their way sure is faster." "Our way's better," said O'Brien. Justice, they say, is swift, but the law is slow. It would be more than a year and a half before the commission case came to trial. All defendants in the commission case were convicted. Several were sentenced to a century of incarceration. The Castaway case, directed specifically against the Gambino family, came to trial in 1986, by which time several defendants, in addition to Castellano and Bellotti, were deceased. Augustus Big Gus Sclafani disappeared on March 1, 1986, and is believed to have been murdered by colleagues. Robert D.B. DiBernardo, the pornography specialist, has not been seen since June 5, 1986, and is presumed dead. Frankie DeChico, believed to have been the setup man for Big Paul's assassination, was killed by a car bomb on April 13th of that same year. Mildred Russo, Bambino associate and deputy clerk in the United States District Court, was found guilty of passing sealed indictments to mob members, for which she received a sentence of 1 year's house arrest, during which time she was allowed to leave her Mulberry Street apartment only for grocery shopping, doctor's appointments, and religious observances. She also lost her job, but not her pension. Joseph Joe Butch Correo, the handsome restaurateur and loan shark, was convicted of obstruction of justice in 1989. The conviction was subsequently overturned. Jimmy Marin, frustrated architect and consummate doodler, received a 5-year sentence for his part in handling Gambino family payoffs and kickbacks on Staten Island construction jobs. Tony Agro had been arrested in Canada and was tried in Florida on charges of loan sharking and attempted murder. Convicted largely on the testimony of his former friend and beating victim Joe Dogs Iannuzzi, he was sentenced to 15 years. Suffering from lung cancer, he was allowed to go home to die, which he did on June 27, 1987. Joseph Pliny Armon grew in stature during this time of adversity. He accepted his arrest with dignity and comported himself as a gentleman during his trial. His finest hour, however, came later, after he'd been convicted of racketeering and was facing a sentence of 15 years. Armon's lawyers argued that the death of Paul Castellano and the change of regime in the Gambino family had effectively ended Armon's career. He was an old man, and not in any way a threat to society, they claimed. He should be immediately released on bail. Rather to the surprise of prosecutors, Judge Jack Weinstein agreed to hold a hearing on this matter. On the day before Christmas 1987, Judge Weinstein made Piney an offer. If he would publicly renounce his association with the Gambino crime family and resign any office he may have held in that or any other criminal organization, he could go free. All he had to do was say the words. He refused, of course. To renounce La Cosa Nostra was to concede the existence of La Cosa Nostra, and this Piney Armon would not do. It would be a violation of omerta. It would rend the fabric of the morality he lived by all his life. He uttered the single word no, and was remanded to custody. Less than an hour after her father's murder, Connie Catalanati presented Gloria Olarte with a sealed envelope containing $18,000 in cash. "My father wanted you to have this. Now get out." The maid left immediately, deeply shaken by her benefactor's death. She is now a travel agent in Bogota, Colombia. Nina Castellano has moved back into the Toad Hill mansion, and one can only guess at the mix of emotions she must have felt at reclaiming those premises and unseating her briefly successful rival. Presumably to lighten the burden of memories, she almost immediately undertook a major redecoration effort. The chrome gooseneck lamp that contained the FBI microphone was thrown out in the trash. Only Big Paul's upstairs bedroom was exempted from the rearranging and the sprucing up. It has been kept as a kind of family shrine, in precisely the condition it was on December 16, 1985. Nina still lives in the mansion, along with her daughter Connie, Connie's husband, and their child. In December 1987, Special Agent Joseph F. O'Brien was summoned to Washington to receive the Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award as the Outstanding Law Enforcement Officer of the Year. In what would surely be the crowning moment of any agent's professional life, he received the coveted plaque from Attorney General Edwin Meese III and FBI Director William S. Sessions. O'Brien's acceptance speech was extremely brief, consisting only of expressions of gratitude for the support and forbearance of his family, for the vision and energy of Bruce Mao and his teammates on the Gambino squad, and for the friendship and professionalism of his partner, Andy Kurins. On the way back to New York, however, O'Brien realized that he'd made a serious omission in his acknowledgments of the people who had made possible his moment of triumph at the Great Hall. He realized, and Andy Kurins realized, that they had a grave to visit. The Moravian Cemetery is just off Toad Hill. On that December day in 1987, the last of the season's falling leaves crackled underfoot as Kurins and O'Brien searched out the final resting place of their fallen adversary. Tony Bellatti's grave was easy to find, marked by a headstone with a curious and incongruous bit of sweetness to it. It featured two carved, overlapping hearts, In one of the hearts was inscribed Thomas, 1940 to 1985. The other heart was patiently vacant, waiting for the passing of Belotti's second wife. A bouquet of faded flowers lay atop the grave. An old caretaker led the way up a slope and pointed out a monolith of pink marble crypts, not more than 50 yards from the Belotti grave. "He's in there. I'll show you the slot, though it ain't marked. The family didn't want people coming to gawk. Maybe they'll put the name on when the old lady dies." He pointed out a blank square of stone on the second tier of slabs, then left the agents to their contemplation. But what does one see, or imagine one sees, when one contemplates a grave? Here there was not even a name, no image or symbol for memory to latch onto, no hook on which to hang a reputation. Private in life, the Godfather is even more so in death. Alone in life, separated from others by the monstrously neutral sort of greatness he was called to, he is more alone now. No mate shares his rest. There is no twinned heart binding his remains to someone still alive. His life's work has been virtually undone by the law and by his successor. His loved ones' recollections of him have been tarnished by the follies of his final years. What remains of Paul Castellano? There is a big house looking down at the Verrazzano Bridge. There is a vast archive now occupying some 25 file drawers among the records of the FBI. And in the minds of some, at least, there is a lingering presence, redolent of cigar smoke, fueled by candy bars, capable of murder and of romance, gruffly arguing certain unallowable but stirring convictions as to how a man should live.
Boss of Bosses. The Fall of the Godfather, the FBI and Paul Castellano was written by Joseph F. O'Brien and Andris Kurins and read by James Naughton. It was abridged for audio by Harold Schmidt and edited by Susan Perrin. The recording engineers were Paul Fowley and Gary Fink. Tape editing and post-production by Leszek Wojcik. The associate producer was Linda Ross. Boss of Bosses was produced and directed by Susan Perrin. This has been a Simon & Schuster AudioWorks presentation.